This is not everybody who wants to join the summer school in Meissen in 2 weeks from now. We have 33 fellows now on the list, so the largest number of fellows we had ever in the history of the summer school. And so probably, we have to rethink how we can organize it so that we can everybody, because this lecture is part of the whole program, and you have to understand a little bit the history before you come to Meissen and to start with the full course. So anybody, welcome to everybody who is here, the 15 participants, and we will have now about 1 hour where I will bring you through the history of internet governance. But before I start, let me give you some background for the history of the Meissen School, because this goes back to the United Nations World Summit on the Information Society, when I and some other now faculty members of the summer school were a member of the United Nations Working Group on Internet Governance, and we were confronted as academics by a lot of questions from people from government, the private sector, civil society, and also other academic peoples, where I can study internet governance. And we realized that there is no faculty, no university in the world which offers a full course on internet governance, because this is a multidisciplinary subject. And as you know from your own academic experiences, that universities are organized in faculties. So you can study law, economics, political science, informatics, or whatever. But the internet goes through all these various disciplines, and that's why internet governance has not a natural home in the academic organizations, neither as a research subject nor as an education subject. And so academic members of the Wiki decided in after the end of the World Summit, within a workshop they organized to offer an own teaching course of about 40 hours, which is relevant to 5 credit points according to the master studies in Europe. And so since 2007 now, we have this annual course in Meissen, and so meanwhile a lot of children coming out from this course. We had just 2 weeks ago the first African school in Durban in South Africa. In a couple of years we have a school in Latin America where we will teach a similar course. We had one in the Arab world, we had one in the Asian world. And with other words, this concept of the summer school seems to be rather successful. We have always more than 120 applications, and we try to select people for this course in Meissen, this one course in Meissen, which more or less fit into our general objective, which is that we want to teach the internet governance leaders of tomorrow's, and we offer learning in a multi-stakeholder environment. It means we are looking for people who have already some experiences in this field of internet governance. So this is not for really undergraduate students. This is for people who have already practical experience. And we are looking also for people who come from the various stakeholder groups. It means from government, from the private sector, from civil society, from the technical, and from the academic community. So when you arrive in Meissen, you will see a rather mix of people, both on the fellow side and on the faculty side. And I hope we will enjoy a wonderful week in Meissen with a lot of interactive discussions and seminars and workshops and questions. Please be prepared with a lot of questions, because this is a unique opportunity for a very interactive discussion. So the starting lecture always in the last schools we had was the history of internet governance. And this history gets longer and longer with every year. So that's why we decided in this year to take out some parts of this lecture and to present it in a webinar as a form of preparation for your summer school, so that you know already more about the history when you arrive in Meissen. And we can save some time in the Monday morning lecture, where we then discuss and can go more in detail through the existing internet governance ecosystem, which is many and growing set of organizations which all contribute to this global mechanism of internet governance, because the first thing you have to understand very quickly is that there is no single point for the governance of the internet. The internet governance is a mechanism of various mechanisms where intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations are working hand in hand on various layers. So while in other fields probably you have one single point where you can control or regulate or whatever, the internet is very diversified, it's decentralized, and there is no single point. So that means it's a whole and huge ecosystem with many different organizations, and the course in Meissen will enable you, to get not only an overview about these various participants in the ecosystem, but also to understand more in detail who does what, why, and and how the various groups are working hand to hand and has to collaborate, otherwise the internet wouldn't work. So the first question I always ask the fellows when I start with the lecture of the history of the internet governance is, does somebody know the birth date of the internet? And then I get various answers. Some students say, okay, it's since we have Facebook, because for a lot of youngsters, the internet started with Facebook. Then I say, no, wait a minute. So it was in the early 90s when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. This was the beginning of the internet. And then I say, no, it was much more earlier. The web was just an application and a new service. It started already in 1974 when Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, both as known as the fathers of the internet, invented the TCP/IP protocol, which enabled the emergence of a network of networks, so that you could link together various networks with a number of computers. But then, some students say, no, it started already before, at least in 1969, when a first network was, built with 4 computers, one in Santa Barbara, one in Los Angeles, one in San Francisco, and one in the University of Utah. And for the first time, 4 computers communicate in a horizontal way in one network. And all these were absolutely correct answers. So more or less we went now the history of the internet backwards. But why in 1969 such a network, was presented so that 4 computers could communicate, to each other in one network? So the reason goes back even 12 years, and the starting point is October 4th in 1957. A lot of people have forgotten this date, but a lot of people will remember September 11th in 2001 when the 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers of downtown Manhattan in New York City. So this was a radical attack against the United States of America and undermined its national security. And this was like a turning point for U.S. military and national security strategy, as we have learned also recently by the disclosure of the Prison program. But there was a similar shock for the United States of America in the 1950s, when the Soviet Union launched its first Sputnik, its first satellite, on October 4th, and more or less the United States took this as a huge military threat, because the Soviets demonstrated with the launch of the Sputnik that in a nuclear war they can attack, they have the capability to attack the territory of the United States via the outer space. Because until 1957, the territory of the United States was rather a safe place. No war took place on the territory of the United States. The only war which took place was the Civil War in the 19th century, when the North and the South states were fighting against each other. But all other wars in the history of the United States took place outside the territory of the United States, because the United States has friendly neighbors in the north and the south, Mexico and Canada, and has oceans on the east and the west coast, the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. So that means it's difficult to attack the United States if you have a good sea and a good air force. But what you need for a distributed army around the globe with the sea and the air force is a good communication system. And so when after October 4th, the United States government was sitting together with their security experts, what could happen, if the Russians attacked the United States of America. So they came up with some options, and that probably, they will not attack the big cities like New York or Boston or San Francisco or Los Angeles. So they will attack military targets. And let's say the first and probably most interesting military target is the communication system of the U.S. Army. And so this communication system was a centralized system. That means with one hit, you could destroy this communication system, which would have traumatic military effects for the security of the United States. So that means President Eisenhower at this time, as a first reaction, signed already a couple of weeks after October 4th, two laws. One created the NASA, which was pushing forward to send the first man of the moon and to win the race against the Russians, to be the first on the moon. And the second was the establishment of DARPA, the Advanced Research Project Agency, which got the mandate, to look into the options, how to react to this military threat. And so over the 1960s then, a lot of research was done how to find the reasonable answer to this military challenge from the Russians. And, this was done by a lot of organizations, universities, MIT, Harvard was involved, and the RAND Corporation. And the RAND Corporation produced a number of reports, more than 10,000 pages. And one of the basic ideas was a very good thing would be to have, instead of a decentralized communication system, because this would not allow the Russians to destroy the military communication system with one hit. So that means the Russians would need a number of rockets to get all nodes from a decentralized communication system. And so the argument was, okay, we need more nodes than the Russians have rockets, so that we can always continue with our communication, because if one node, one server is destroyed, then the communication can go around the server and can find its way to the destination in a proper way. And so as a result of this research, which was done under the Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, the idea of a decentralized network emerged, and the first realization was then in this network, which emerged in 1969 with the 4 universities. I think we should go now to the first slide. Can you change the slides? Probably this goes to the host, so that means we should go to another slide, because I have now the can somebody change the slides here? No? Okay, if this is not possible, then I'll explain it. The first slide is about what I've called the 5 waves of internet governance. And so I think it's important really to understand, also against the background of today's discussion about security and privacy and all this, and the activities of the National Security Agency. The first phase of the internet was a military phase. So that means it, I think it is changed now. So I don't see that. Probably somebody can give me a sign where you have now the first slide is the 5 waves of internet governance. So that I can, I do not see it on my WebEx computer here. And I don't know whether you see the first slide, where I have the history of Internet governance subdivided into 5 different waves. The first waves from 1957 to the 1970s was indeed the military wave. And so I think this is important really to understand that the military and national security questions were involved in Internet development from the very, very first day. So that means if we discuss issues today like national security, person data protection, and NSA and others, so this is not new. So the reason why we have the Internet was really this reason I explained in my opening statement, referring to the start of the first Soviet satellite. But an interesting side effect from this military research was that a lot of graduate students who were involved in the research, mainly at the West Coast in the 1960s, realized very quickly that this military research can be used also for a lot of other fantastic forms of communication, in particular for academic communication. So, and I think there was a very interesting movement that in this 1960s, the whole culture in the United States, in particular on the West Coast, was dominated by this flower power culture of the 1968 movement. So there was the slogans, because there was war in Vietnam. The slogan was "Make peace, not war." If you go to San Francisco, we have flowers in your hair, and all this anti-establishment movement, was a very important cultural effect. And a lot of these graduate students discovered in this network philosophy of a decentralized communication system a wonderful tool which would be against any form of establishment and centralized power execution. So that means the Internet, and I think this is a really interesting point, and we shouldn't forget about this, was established to have not a central or point of failure where you can attack it. So it was a decentralized, but with a decentralized mechanism, you also decentralize decision-making power, you decentralize power. And insofar, a decentralized communication system enabled a lot of people to do things which were really impossible to do it in a centralized system. Because, with this network architecture, all the power moved to the edges of the network. So there was in the center of the network was no real power, because there was only servers which did send packages from A to B. And, if the server was collapsing, then another server was who could the same thing. So that means this end-to-end principle was really, the basic architectural element in the making of the Internet, and this could be used for, a security purpose for the military, but this could be used also for all kinds of academic communication. And so the second wave was determined then by this academic communication. I just get an information here with to the slides. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now we have it here. Okay. So this is we are now with the second wave, with the academic wave from the 1970s to the 1990s. And this was the time when all these protocols, these codes, and other things were developed. So the third wave of the Internet started in the early 1990s with the World Wide Web, because this is when people realized the Internet is not only good for academic communication, it's also fantastic for commercial communications. And in the 90s, we did see the .com boom. The .com boom collapsed then in the year 2000, but the reason for the collapse of the .com boom was not that the Internet is not for commercial activities. It was just the number of Internet users at this time. They are still too low to support all this business activity. So 5-10 years later, the situation is different. We have now nearly 4 billion internet users. That means with one click, a company can reach out to 4 billion people around the globe. This is a huge, a gigantic market which never existed before. And so, but this commercial wave started in the early 1990s. And, you know, the reason for this was that the World Wide Web offered an application and services where you could really offer, you know, all forms of products and services now for sale online. So, but you know, with the year 2000, when more or less already at this time 500 million people were online, so more and more the internet became, you know, a mass medium. So it until the year 2000, it was still a world for geeks and freaks. You know, people were really privileged if they had access to the internet. So it was more in the United States and Europe than in the rest of the world. So China at this time had less than 1 million internet users. Now they have nearly 600 million internet users. So the real explosion in the internet use started in the year 2000. And this is also when the United Nations became aware of this and started the World Summit on the Information Society. And we will come back with the negotiations for the World Summit on the Information Society a little bit later. And we could say now from 2010 on onwards, you know, the internet is now for everything and everybody. I think the internet is not a special world anymore. But it means years ago we separated the real world from the virtual world. So, but now I think the real world is the internet world. So that means, in particular for new generations, they make no difference anymore, you know, about their real life and their virtual life. Life is life, and they can do everything they want, you know. While in the past things were separated, you know, a telephone was a telephone, a camera was a camera, and you know, a radio was a radio. So now you have everything in once, but it means you can combine everything with everything as soon as it can be digitalized and it's just zeros and ones. Then you can, you know, do whatever you want. And the only barrier for doing something is your own creativity, is your own capacity for innovation. And so there are not real material barriers anymore. So that means the barrier comes from really the level of individual power of creativity. So I have called this the new internet complexity because the internet is now our world. And insofar, it's not a surprise. Some people were surprised when the disclosure took place the last couple of weeks about activities on security agencies. I think all these different groups, the military, the academic, the commercial, the individuals, you know, participated in internet communication the last 30, 40 years. Sometimes it was forgotten about it, but the military and the security people, they're always there. It was not a surprise. The surprise is, or the issue is, does they follow the rule of the law? And so far, we will have to discuss also during the Meissen week a lot about internet regulation. What are basic principles? What are the values of the internet? How much is too much? How far we can go, at least in a democratic society, so we can put all this more into the context of a democratic society. If we want to have free and open and borderless internet, then we want to have also a democratic internet. Okay, let's go now to the next slides. So I have singled out here 3 internet specifics, which you have to understand if you want to understand all challenges which come with internet applications. So the first thing is you have to understand the structural organization. I explained them already, so that means no need to waste a lot of time here. So the basic structure of the internet is it's a decentralized network. It's not a hierarchy. I think this is important to understand because all communication technologies in the past were centralized communication technologies which were organized in form of a hierarchy. Telecommunication had a central switch center. Broadcasting has a centralized sender. So it's always that you have one control point. That's why, in a revolution or coup d'etat, always, the military or whatever, the people who make the coup d'etat, you occupy the broadcasting station and the telecommunication center. Because if they control communication, then, they can do whatever they want to a high degree. So it means centralized hierarchical communication systems can be controlled. Decentralized communication systems, which have no hierarchy, are, extremely difficult to control. You can control single networks, but the internet is a network of networks. But it means it's nearly impossible, or not nearly, it's impossible to control all the networks. You can control one single network. You can build a firewall around the network, and then you can control what is inside the firewall. But the 10,000s of networks which are linked together with the TCP/IP protocol cannot be controlled by one single unit. And insofar, it can also not be governed by one single unit. This is one of the problems we will come back later in the next week. So this is important to understand the end-to-end principle, the decentralized nature of the architecture of the internet, and this is networks versus hierarchies. I think this is important to understand. The second thing which is important to understand is the nature of the resources you use and you need if you want to communicate via the internet. So you need primarily IP addresses and domain names, and then you have to have some servers and the needed protocols. All these resources, domain names, IP addresses, servers, protocols, are more or less unlimited resources which are not linked to a certain territory. In the past, in the industrial age, all resources you needed, oil, coal, minerals, or whatever, are limited resources and linked to a territory. Minerals are in Siberia, oil is in the Middle East. So, and if you go back through the history of wars, then a lot of wars took place just to get control over natural resources and limited resources. So that means if you have a resource which is limited, you need a system for distribution and for fair distribution or unfair distribution. It depends who controls it. So, and then, if a certain resource is linked to a certain territory, the question is then who has the sovereignty over this territory and, can I get access to this territory? So all these are questions which are totally irrelevant for the resources of the internet. It means an IP addresses is used in a certain territory, but it's not linked to a certain territory. So you can distribute IP addresses around the globe the same with domain names. So it means you can have a country code top-level domain and an email address which ends with a domain from a CCTLD, or you can have a generic top-level domain like .com or .info or whatever. But it's very difficult to discover where this domain name is located. So certainly you have a US databases very registered, and you have servers who operate on a certain territory. But for the completion of the communication, there is no need to take this very specific server on this territory. So it means the routing and all the other peering agreements and what is relevant for it, can be done on a very individual way, and you can bypass barriers and can bridge and tunnel also certain barriers. And this is important. It means to start a business in the industrial age, you needed probably first to buy land and then to have a lot of investment, and build a factory and then to offer services and products to your customers. In the internet, you just register a domain name. Google.com is just a domain name. You could get it for a couple of dollars 30 years or 20 years ago. And now it's an empire on this domain name, which goes around the globe. And the same with Facebook.com and others. So I think this is really an important point to understand, that with the resources we're using on the internet, we have a new quality of resources. And this means these resources are unlimited. They are not linked to a territory. So certainly, you have to deal in the internet also with limited resources. Just one example is electricity. So access to the internet is denied in a number of places in the world because you have only limited access to electricity or not enough access to electricity. So that means it does not mean that you are totally independent from the world of the industrial age. So that means the information age and the internet age is an additional layer to the existing world. So it does not substitute the old world of the industrial age. So, but it's add a new layer to the industrial society. So that means the information society does not substitute the industrial society, as the industrial society did not substitute the agricultural society. So that means we still need tomatoes and potatoes. That means agriculture did not disappear when the industry started. And so that means the industry will not disappear when the internet economy started. But you have to have this understanding of a layered system, and each layer has its own resources, but the specific of the internet resources is that they are unlimited and not territorial. And the second, the third specific you have to understand is the nature of the regulation. So that means certainly internet does not exist in a law-free zone. That means we all live in a country, we have citizenship from one country, and we have to follow the rules of our country. And we have international treaties, we have international law, and so there is no legal vacuum. But the difference with the internet is that a lot of specific internet regulations are not done in a traditional way by parliaments, via laws, but are done by the users and the providers of the services themselves in form of RFCs, of requests for comments. So a lot of the regulations are technical by nature, but with political, social, and economic implications. So that means you have not a unique system of regulation for the internet, but you have a rather decentralized a system of certain elements of regulation which are located in various parts in the internet governance ecosystem, where different bodies and different groups regulate, self-regulate, co-regulate various aspects of the internet. This is insofar important because all communication technologies in the past were strongly regulated both by national legislation and by international legislation. So the first thing which happened when the telegraph was invented was the adoption of national telecommunication laws and followed by international telegraph conventions. When broadcasting arrived, so countries immediately adopted national broadcasting laws because broadcasting emerged first in the national context, and then you had some international agreements for frequencies and even content-related issues on the international level. But when the internet emerged, nobody came with the idea to have now an internet national law or an international internet convention. So because the internet grew in a way bottom up, and from the very early beginning as a global medium. So it did not emerge in just one country. So it was networks were combined, and very often networks cross borders by just ignoring the borders, the physical borders. So that means they had their own elements, how network was constituted. And I think this is also important to understand that the nature of internet regulation is different. It does not mean that governmental regulation will go away. It means we'll see a lot of issues where governmental regulation plays a role. Intellectual property, privacy, freedom of expression, security, crime, and all this. So, but if you look a little bit closer into the issue, then we'll realize that this is not new because internet is not in a law-free zone, and a crime is a crime in a crime. It means if you steal money offline or if you steal money online, there is no difference. It's a crime. And, just because you do it online, it gets not legalized. And insofar, the existing legislation for a lot of these traditional areas of law is also relevant, certainly for the internet. So there is no need to develop new laws specifically for the internet. We have just to adjust the existing legislation to this new technology. There is a problem that you have conflicting legislation, conflicting jurisdictions. That means different governments, different states have regulated the same issue in a different way across national borders. In particular, if it comes to issues like content of information. So we have in Germany strong laws against Nazi propaganda, But in the United States, you are free to be a Nazi or to, present yourself as Adolf Hitler or something like that. So that's not forbidden in the United States. We have a problem in Germany. So, but in the internet, we do not have these borders, and people in Germany have easy access to Nazi propaganda in the United States. So that means this is a challenge, and here we need more collaboration among various, not only among governments, but also among all other members of the internet governance ecosystem, the ISPs, the various content providers, and others, so have to work together. So, but this point, what I wanted to do here is just to say that you have to understand the specifics of the regulation. Yeah, I did the wave one here with the next slide, so there is no need to go back to it. So let me spend some time with the next slide about protocols and organizations, so which is more or less, was the core issue of the what I call the wave two, the academic wave. It means this was a time when all these new forms of self-regulation emerged in a transparent and bottom-up process. And a very important element here is to understand what an IFC is, and why an IFC came up, and how today an IFC is managed. The IFC was invented by Steve Crocker, who is now the chairman of the ICANN board. And the idea why the IFC came up was a very simple one, because they just started with this network among the 4 universities, and the question was, okay, we have to fix some protocols, we have to fix some rules how we communicate together. And while one person had one idea, another person had probably another idea, how to fix it. And so Steve Crocker had the idea, and that the best thing is, if somebody has an idea, he distributes on a list this idea and asks for comments. So, he should say, okay, here is my proposal, how to settle the problem. I have a request now for comments. If somebody can do it better, let me know. And then if replies came in and with proposals, how to improve this very special proposed regulation, a working group was established, and then they tried to find what was called rough consensus among the participants in the working group. Rough consensus is an interesting concept, because rough consensus is not full consensus, but it's much more than 51%. Normally in a parliament, you adopt a law with 51%. Only for a change of the constitutions, you need a 2/3 majority. But the internet community more or less agreed that to have a rule, it's not enough to have just a simple majority. So you need more. And this was called rough consensus. But to reach 100% consensus is unreachable, because you will have always a group, a person, an individual, an institution who is not very satisfied with the proposed regulation. So the compromise was rough consensus is something in between, 2/3, more than 60, 70, 80%, but less than 100 and more than 51. It was never defined exactly what rough consensus is. So the procedure which emerged to identify whether the discussion has reached the level of rough consensus was that just the chairman asked the people in the room where they discussed the issue, what do you think? Can we now adopt this regulation? And the people in the room said, if they agreed, if they strongly agreed, they did very louder. If they not 100% agreed, they were, reduced their voice. And so the chairman then, tried to find out whether the is loud enough in the room to say, okay, this is now rough consensus, and then an IFC was adopted and got a number. So this was the way how the textbook, the legal book, the law book of the internet emerged since 1969. So this is an interesting procedure, which has probably some political examples known as so-called round tables, which emerged in particular in the during the end of the Cold War in some East Bloc countries, where a traditional party system, the old party system disappeared, a new party system was not yet there, and all groups and concerned people came around the table and tried to find out what is the best solution. So I think in the internet, this has happened since 1969 and was very successful because, as there's now more than 6,000 or 7,000 IFCs, you can say, all these protocol standards and regulations which came out from the IFC enabled a development of a technology which has now reached out now to 4 billion internet users around the globe. Never before in the history of mankind a technology had such success. So with other words, the IFC methodology, how to reach a regulation for the internet is obviously successful. So probably it cannot be the only one, you need additional elements. But it's important for you to know what an RFIC is, how it emerged, and because all the other protocols and standards and codes we have on the internet, they add the TCP/IP protocol, the mail protocol, the DNS protocol, the HTML protocol, HTTP protocol. All this were adopted via RFCs. So that means the whole regulation of the internet is based on these RFCs. And in the process of the discussion of this regulation, also the relevant organizations emerged. It started with the Internet Architecture Board in 1975, then the Internet Engineering Task Force emerged, then the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority emerged in 1989, JANA, under John Postel. Then ISOC emerged, the first regional Internet registries, which, were responsible for the allocation of IP addresses, emerged with RIPE NCC, for instance, in 1992. The World Wide Web Consortium emerged, and in 1998, ICANN was established. All these were organizations, which were private, non-governmental organizations constituted by the various involved or affected groups, parties, individuals, researchers, companies, corporations, and so a whole network of different organizations emerged with a very clear defined mandate, very often limited technical mandate, but all this together constituted what we call today the Internet governance ecosystem. So it was really a bottom-up process. It was not top-down. Governments did not sit together and created intergovernmental organizations or intergovernmental councils or whatever, or proposed international conventions or adopted national law. It was driven in a bottom-up, in an open and transparent process, and over 20, 30 years, a whole network, a whole new ecosystem emerged. And I think this is also important to understand. So the next thing which is important for you to know before you come to Meissen is, how the domain name system functions. Because in the beginning, the computer were numbered just like telephones. So the telephone number is a little bit different from the IP number. In the telephone numbering system, you have a number for your telephone, then you have a number for your city, you have a number for your country, and so all this centralized database for the telephone number is managed by an intergovernmental organization, the IPU. And so that means the numbering system in the telephone world is very controlled by governments and is hierarchically organized, via country and city codes. While the numbers of in the network, the IP numbers, internet protocol numbers, are different. So you have a number for your computer, and you have a number for your network. And this was more or less behind the IP version 4 protocol, IP address version 4 protocol, which had two blocks. The first two blocks were the numbers for the computer, and the second two blocks, separated by a dot, were the numbers for the network. And at this time, when the IP version 4 protocol was invented, there were 4.3 billion IP addresses available, and at this time, other people said, okay, that's enough. So that means that there will be no need to have more IP addresses. So, but then later, people said, okay, oh, probably, we will sooner or later running out of IP addresses, and the new IP protocol was developed, IP version 6, which is 128 bits long and has zillions, nearly endless number of IP addresses. The problem with the IP addresses is because, it's difficult to remember. Even today, it's difficult to remember all your telephone number, your fax number, your mobile phone number, and all the codes and pins and you have. So, and so far, John Postel had the idea already in the 1970s and the early 1980s then to give the IP numbers a human face by giving it a name. More or less, it's the same what you are doing now on your mobile phone. That means when you have a mobile phone number and you just said, this is my wife, this is my friend, this is Rosa, this is Linda, or this is somebody else. So it means on your mobile phone you have just the names, but the important thing is not the name, the important thing is the number, because the number is the identifier which will then identify the device, the mobile phone of your friend, your wife, or whatever. So that means there is a relationship between names and numbers. And Postel with Paul Moka-Petris, invented the so-called DNS protocol, and which translates IP addresses in domain names. So that means to give the IP addresses, the numbers, a human face. This was the basic driving force for the establishment of the so-called domain name system. When Postel started and Moka-Petris to design this domain name system, they followed more or less the experience in the real world, where people have a name which has a family name and a given name and then first or second or whatever name. So it means like John Fitzgerald Kennedy or Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. So it means the key name is the family name, and then you move forwards from the name. And in some Arabic countries, you have 10 or 12 names after the family name. It's sometimes difficult to identify, what is the name, but you have always, a key name, which is in our world is called family name. And so they followed us and said, okay, we have top-level domains, which is like family names, and then we have a dot, and on the other side of the dot, we can add names, on the second level, on the third level, of the fourth level, as much as we want to do it. So I think this was the idea when then they started and said, okay, let's discuss first on the top-level domains, which families we need. And the original idea was, okay, let's have 3 families for the US and 3 families for the rest of the world. The 3 families for the US were .mil, because the money came from the military, .gov, it was from the government, and then .edu for the academics, education. So this is early days. I think I was teaching in Washington, in DC in the early 90s, and I had a edu address from the American University in Washington, srs.au.edu. And with the edu address, we were very recognized in the community. .com at this time were the bad people. So because for the rest of the world, Postel and Paul Moka-Petris introduced a system, for 3, also for 3 families. .com for commercial people, .net for networks, and .org for all kinds of organizations. So this was the beginning of the domain name system. Only a couple of months later, some people approached Postel and Moka-Petris and said, we have so many countries in the world. Wouldn't it be good if we give every country also family names, so that we can know a little bit, where email is coming from, and our friends probably do not want to have a .com and .org, and they want to have an identifier which links them to their home country. And so the problem was, what is a country? Postel said, if I go to the United Nations, at this time the United Nations had 145 member states, and Switzerland was not a member state of the United Nations. Switzerland hosted the United Nations, but became a member only in the 1990s, because Switzerland wanted to remain neutral for many, many years, and did not join an intergovernmental organization. So the question was, what is a country? And Postel said, okay, I'm not in a position to decide what a country is, and he was searching around and did find an interesting list in another intergovernmental organization, the International Standardization Organization, ISO. And the ISO, managed lists all kinds of codes, for postal code, for codes for cars, and things like that. And they had a list. The longest list was 243 countries and territories, islands. And this was the largest list he could find. And he said, okay, if the ISO has a methodology to identify a country or territory which belongs to the list, then we just use this list as a basis for the delegation of country code top-level domains. And so that means all countries who were on this list got a two-letter code, DE for Germany, or UK for the United Kingdom, or US for the United States, or DK for Japan, or DK for Denmark, and so on. And who was on the list, on the ISO 3166 list, he just got a top-level domain. And then Postel was looking for a manager for this domain, and normally delegated then the management of this top-level domain by handshake to a trusted manager. So it was not a thing which went through a national parliament, when a CCT, a country code top-level domain was established. It was just handed out by a handshake from John Postel to a trusted manager in this country. And in a number of countries, Postel did not find a trusted manager, so he asked a friend whether he could, on behalf of this country, manage the top-level domain. So the first delegation to the top-level domain for China, .cn, was handed out to a German professor who had his institution had a contract with the Academy of Science in Beijing. And so when the German professor in the late 1980s was in Beijing, and they discussed, how to link China to the internet, so the Chinese academics was excited. Chinese government had no clue what the internet is at this time. So, but for John Postel, it was very delicate, also for the national security reasons, to delegate a top-level domain to China, because there was still Cold War and we had COCOM regulations. And so the trick was that he handed it out to a German professor who was a trusted person. And the German professor, said, okay, I can manage the server from Germany, but can do the service for China. So that means the server, the name server for the .cn domain was in Germany until the mid of the 1990s. Only in 1995, and the service was moved back to China when they created their own coordination center for the National Information Center, CINIC. And then there was a redelegation. So now certainly .cn is under full sovereignty of China. But in the early days, and this is we talk here about the history of the internet. It's important to understand how all this emerged. It was bottom up. It was in the shadow of national regulation. No parliament, no government really was involved in the way how the system emerged. And the same with the root server. So that means you have to have server database, which have all the information about the various elements of a domain name. The system is organized in a way that, in the so-called root server, you have the data for the zone files for the top-level domains. In the name server, you have the data for the second level domains. And then you can go further down the route. That means other servers have then the third level or the fourth level. So it means no server has information about all domain names of the world. So that means you have only in the server, data from a part of the domain name. So, but certainly the most important is the family name, and you have to have a centralized database to guarantee that each domain name exists only once. Otherwise, you would have a tremendous confusion if you would hand out one domain name twice, and then emails would arrive and requests for websites would go in the wrong direction. So it means that's why you have to have in a decentralized internet a centralized database, for all this data which have the domain names in it. So, and all the, at the moment, nearly 300 top-level domains we have as country code top-level domains and generic top-level domains, so are in a database which is the root server. So, but there is not only one root server, because Postel said, okay, we cannot have a single point of failure, we have to distribute the system. So that means he distributed one and the same database in 13 root servers, more or less around the globe. 10 of the root servers were in the United States, one is in Japan, one in Sweden, and one in the Netherlands and UK. So the system is that, you know, the database, you have one, the so-called A root server in the beginning, you know, had all the data from the top-level domains, and every 8 hours, this database was mirrored with the 13 other root servers. That means in a case one root server collapsed, so there was no collapse of the internet, because then, you know, a request for a website or sending an email could go via another root server if the root server was needed for the communication. So the problem is what later became a political problem, that 10 of the 13 root servers are in the United States, and this was seen by a number of people as an element of control over the internet by the US government, because the US government had introduced already in the early 90s a system that the let's say the addition of a zone file in the root server, or the modification of the zone file, or deletion of the zone file, needs the authorization of the US government. So it was part of the contract. At this time, the US government had with the Information Science Institute at the University of Southern California in Marina del Rey, and John Postel was the person who managed all this. And so the US government, via the National Science Foundation, funded the research project, and they said, okay, we cannot leave it in the hand of one single man, or even a single institution like the Information Science Institute, the institute where Postel worked. It would be, you know, overstretched if they, you know, have this responsibility. It has to be done by a trusted party. And so, and the arrangement was then that the authorization of the publication of the zone file in the root can be done only if the US government controls whether the procedures for the addition, deletion, or modification of the zone file went according to the rules. So it means the US government, according to this contractual arrangement, does not interfere into the making or changing of a zone file. It just looks whether the procedures has been followed the rules, and then rubber stamps the request to put a new zone file into the root, or to modify an existing zone file, or to delete a zone file. Certainly, you know, this has a certain hypothetical power. That means without an okay of the US government, nothing can happen. So that means theoretically the US could stop the addition of the zone file into the root, or a modification, or it could even order a deletion of the zone file from the root. But this is a very theoretical option, and we can discuss probably the root server issue also when you are in Meissen. So this has never happened, and all the speculation also which were in the recent years, that some governments said, okay, this is the way how the US controls the net, are not really well founded, because this is a very theoretical option, and this is not the red button we know from the nuclear age, because all the root server operators are independent from each other, so they are linked together via voluntary agreements. But if the US government would give an order to delete, for instance, one country code top-level domain from the A root server, which is called now the hidden server, because, you know, this is now a server which operates in the background of the A root server as a special safeguard mechanism. So that means that safe against attacks from different parties. But it means even if they would do this for the A root server or the hidden server, then the root server in Sweden or in Japan, you know, would probably not would mirror this if there is a political motivation behind a change in the root server. And next to the 13 root server for technical reasons. You cannot add more root server in this horizontal chain, but you can add a lot of more root server in the vertical chain to each of the 13 root server. And this has happened the last year, so you have now more around 220 root servers around the world. You have around 10 in Africa now, you know, and also in Latin America, a lot in Asia, a lot in Europe. In so far, the idea that the root server is really the central switch for the internet is a wrong mystification. So you have to have this technical procedures in place. You have to have authority who, let's say, controls that the procedures are quite well. And so that means at the moment it's so that ICANN, in cooperation with Jana, is responsible for this. That means when we see now the emergence of a lot of new top-level domains, then, you know, if the negotiations are completed between ICANN and the new registry for, let's say, the books or the Berlin or the whatever, then, you know, ICANN sends the zone file with all the protocols to the via Jana to the US government, and the US government just looks into the procedures, that's everything, you know, all the technical details which are needed, you know, for the publication of the zone file in the root are well, and then, you know, it sends it to the very sign which manages the hidden server for publication in the root. So somebody has to double check this. In the World Summit on the Information Society, sometimes some governments propose to internationalize this function. That means to create something like a United Nations Internet Security Council, where there's veto states and veto rights for certain governments. But if you probably you can imagine if this would become the publication of the zone file for a given country would become the subject of a political discussions among big powers in the United Nations, then probably you would neutralize each other, and this zone file would never go into the root. So you would politicize the management of a technical resource which far-reaching consequences for the economy, for innovation, and for a lot of other things. So that means while certainly the US government has here a certain special role, but this role is the result of history. When we had as the Working Group on Internet Governance, our first meeting with Kofi Annan, when he was the Secretary General of the United Nations, he also recognized this fact and that you cannot wish away history. So this is part of the history. The Internet has emerged in the United States, and the mechanisms, you know, which came out from this has been mainly developed in the United States. And while you know, we have a lot to do to further internationalize and democratize the Internet, so that means on the other hand, we live also with some historical heritage, and so far it worked quite well. That means there is no single case known where this special right was misused or did lead to some other bad things. So so in this process in the 1980s, 90s, then you know, the Jana, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, this was this time only John Postel, it was a one-man organization, emerged, and then the US government started in the early 90s to put all this on a more or less bilateral contractual basis. First with NSI, Network Solutions Inc., which is now very signed, and with the institutions like the University of John Postel, so that the DNS emerged also in a bottom-up process and ended up with a rather self-regulated mechanism where a number of partners, registries, registrars, or generic and country code top-level domains together, you know, with a number of service providers, you know, produce an own network of networks where they bring finally the domain name, the email address to the requester, that means to the registrant and the individual internet user. So I come not directly to an end, but before I conclude, you know, with some remarks on the ICANN and the World Summit on the Information Society, let me look into some theoretical concepts which were very popular in the early days of the internet in the 1990s. One is the first I have here is Tim Berners-Lee. It's now the slide number 7. It's Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the World Wide Web, who said there is the idea that society can run without a hierarchical bureaucratic government being involved in every step, if only we can hit on the right set of rules for peer-to-peer interaction. Our design of the internet and the web is a search for a set of rules which will allow computers to work together in harmony. And our spiritual and social quest is for a set of rules which will allow people to work together in harmony. So it means the dream was of Tim Berners-Lee and a lot of other internet pioneers. If we can really develop a communication system where every computer can communicate with every computer based on a unique protocol, why not, to translate this into our human communication and to say, we enable people to communicate to each other, and this will certainly help to bring this more knowledge and more communication, also more harmony into the world. We know this is an illusion, but I just want to remember that this was the vision, the driving force behind a lot of these internet pioneers of the first hours. Another interesting slogan, and this is still valid today, is that Dave Clark, one of the first chairmen of the IPF, said, "We do not believe in kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus, factual approach, and running code." That means the internet does not need really kings or presidents. And as I said, there's no voting, it's rough consensus. So that means we discuss as long as it is needed, so that we have the feeling that all groups are now included. So that means we do not exclude substantial groups or substantial positions. So it's much more than, as I said, 51%, the simple majority. And kings and presidents are not needed because they have a distributed system. If we have kings and if we have presidents, then we have dozens and hundreds or thousands, because each person or institution which managed certain parts of the internet could be seen as a small kingdom, but a kingdom which is very open, which is transparent, which is part of the community. And insofar, the internet really it's been just a little bit people joking to each other. They call them kings, presidents, or tsars. So, but the reality is nobody is really the king or the emperor or the president of the internet. It's not needed. It's really rough consensus, factual approach, and running code. That means we are moving forward. And that's also important to keep the internet open. That means if you have a solution, then make the solution in a way that it can be further enhanced and that you do not close the code so that, that's the end of the story. So that means that Bill Clinton has sometimes said in a speech to the ICANN meeting in San Francisco, internet governance is like stumbling forward. So that means you're moving forward step by step. If you move forward with the protocols, then, you will have another layer, you have another invention, another application. And the beauty is this works together because the standard is open. So, and that's why, we have in the field of latest development, we have this with the Apple iPhone and things like that. If you have the closed software or, so-called wallet gardens, this is against the nature of the internet. That's why network neutrality is so important, to keep the internet as it is, to keep the internet open. There are two other good quotations, in the next slide 8 now, from John Peter Barlow. He was a rock singer. He was very active in the Electronic Foundation, and in 1996 he published in Davos, where we have the World Economic Summit the World Economic Forum every year, a declaration of cyber independence, where he said, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, new home of mine. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." So this was really a very radical language. Was driven also by the dream to separate the old world and the new world. It's important to remember that a lot of these dreams, have driven the internet forward in the 1990s. Today we know it better. We know that all stakeholders have to work together. That means you cannot organize the government, and you should not leave the internet in the hands of governments, but you cannot do it, without the government. That means you cannot leave it, or you should not leave it alone in the hands of the private sector. But you cannot do it, without the private sector. And the internet user, the civil society, has to play an important role. And so far, the multi-stakeholder model, which emerged in the center of the World Summit on the Information Society and in IPen, is seen today as the most efficient system how to govern the internet. And we will use the Meissen week and discuss the multi-stakeholder model in all its facets. But I just wanted to remember that there were different ideas in the 1990s, and at this separation of the old world and the new world, the world of governments and the world of the internet users, remained a little bit in illusion. It was a nice vision, but the reality is that we need everybody. So the internet is not that people, fight against each other. The internet is about collaboration, communication, and sharing. I think the concept of sharing is really important, and sharing not only among you and me, but sharing among all stakeholders and including governments. An important point was made in a great book in 1998 by Lawrence Lessig, at this time a professor in Harvard, later in Stanford, when he wrote or made clear more or less that the in internet it's the technical code which creates the law. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier when I described the RFC procedure and the IETF, which managed now the RFC. And Lessig wrote, in cyberspace, we must understand how code regulates. We can build or architect and code cyberspace to protect values that we believe are fundamental, or we can allow those values to disappear. There is no middle ground. Code is never found, it is only ever made, and only ever made by us. I think this is important statement, because it says that the layer of the internet regulation, the ground layer, is the technical code. That means whatever politicians want to do to adopt laws, they will fail if they ignore the technical realities. And the technical realities are made by the code makers. So that means the code makers create the space for the lawmakers. In the past, it was different. And I refer to the telegraph legislation or the broadcasting legislation. In this communication technologies, it was the lawmakers which created the space for the technicians, for the code makers. So they declared exactly, what technical device was illegal or not illegal, in which frequency spectrum you could use a certain device, and all this was very specifically regulated. So that means the lawmakers defined the space for the code makers. But here in the internet world, it was different. Now the code makers more or less create a space for the lawmakers, because the lawmakers, they will totally fail if they adopt laws which ignore the code. So the code becomes the driving force for legislation. And it's absolutely correct to argue that today you cannot separate anymore political from technical regulation. So both has to go hand in hand. And as it said by Lessig, the code is also made by men. So that means the question is about the legitimacy of the code makers. And code makers can close avenues, but can open streets. So that means the question is really, we see a shift in the question of accountability. And that's why we need a new level of collaboration in the multi-stakeholder model among code makers, lawmakers, and other people who deal with that. But anyhow, the book by Lessig was a great eye-opener, and people, started to understand, what the specifics of the internet is after reading Larry Lessig's book. A final quotation comes from Wim Cerf, the father of the internet. He visited Australia in 2010, and he was asked by a journalist from the computer world, Mr. Cerf, did you expect when you invented the TCP/IP protocol in 1974 that nowadays there are 3 or nearly 4 billion people are online. And Windsurf answered, oh, certainly I did not expect this. But the question was, would it be something that could be rolled out to the rest of the world? And so that means, and he said, we didn't know for sure, but when we worked on it, we decided not to patent, not to copyright, not to control, but to share everything we knew about the Internet design to the general public all around the world. What is amazing is that it was a US Department of Defense project, when we were in the middle of the Cold War. In spite of all that, we made all this completely available to everybody. And the only reason it was possible is nobody paid any attention to us. I think this is an important statement. And it has 2 parts. The first thing is, he said, okay, we did not patent, not copyright, not control, but share everything we knew. So I asked it, Vint, in a session in Geneva last year when ISOC celebrated its 20th anniversary. What would happen if you would have copyrighted the TCP/IP protocol? And his answer was interesting. He would say, probably the Internet would not be what it is today, but probably I would be a rich man. So, and I think this is an interesting answer. From the very early beginning, and also the philosophy of the Internet pioneers of the early days was, this has to be open to everybody. So we have to share. Sharing is the basic philosophy of the Internet of the early days. And if you look in today's discussions and probably future discussions about Internet, its economy, policy, and things like that, then you see that this basic principle is under big pressure, and so we have to defend it. So sharing open free Internet is under pressure. So it's not that you can take it for granted for every time. So it was a decision by these people that they wanted to share because this is good for everybody, and they were also successful. And the second point here is that he said, okay, we were in the middle of the Cold War, and nobody intervened. We could do this, so nobody stopped us. And he said the only reason was it was possible is nobody paid any attention to us. Indeed, in the 1970s, 80s, it was in the shadow of governmental regulation. So it means nobody took it serious. Even European governments ignored the Internet until the end of the 1990s. So there was only little awareness that the Internet will become what it is today. And so this has enabled a lot of people to do things because, they had no fear that there will be an intervention. This has changed today. So now the Internet is in the spotlight of governments. That's why we will see a lot of more boxing, a lot of more intergovernmental fighting, a lot of more of the conflicts among various stakeholders, among governments. And in so far, the good old times are over. But I think it's also important to mention here what Windsurf was convinced that, sometimes it's good if nobody understands what you are doing. Then you have much more freedom and you can do really what you want. But anyhow, this time is over. So now I come to the close of this lecture. And just I want to mention a little bit the struggle for how the governance system for the management of the critical resources of the Internet, the main names, IP addresses, root servers, and protocols emerged. So in 1989, it was, as I described, it was just John Postel who invented the DNS together with Paul Mocker-Petlitz, and who had this contract with the US Department of Commerce. So it was simple things, very technical regulations, and sharing of responsibility. So that means John Postel managed the Beirut server, the Beirut server went to NSI, and the US government had the authorization capacity for the publication of zone files in Beirut. So it was not a big thing, and Jana was just a one-man organization. And in 1989, 1990, nobody could imagine that the Internet will be a thing for 4 billion users. So at this time, there was less than 1 million users. So it means it was a substantial number of researchers, some 100,000, but nobody was really aware that this thing could become so big. Then when ISOC was established in 1992 and the World Wide Web emerged, then Postel realized that um, uh, in particular, the generic top-level domain space is probably too small. So we have the 243 country code top-level domains, but only 6 generic top-level domains. And we said probably now with the World Wide Web, there are much new opportunities. So probably we should broaden the generic top-level domain space, but now already probably I cannot do it alone anymore as we did it in the 1980s. So this means I need an umbrella organization, and he tried to do it under the umbrella of ISOC and to introduce 150 new generic top-level domains like the book, the drug, or what else. So, but this unfortunately failed. And the reason for it is primarily also, a commercial business reason, because it was in 1993 when the US government realized that the domain name space could become an interesting business opportunity. And because, with the explosion of the World Wide Web, they realized there's a tremendous search for domain names. And so they started discussion with NSI and said, okay, we fund your operations that you give out for free domain names to interested people. But now with such a thirst for new domain names, so that means you should get a right to charge for domain names, because we do not see anymore a need that we fund your operations. That means you can make your own money, and we stop our funding, and in exchange you can charge for domain names. So this was more or less the deal then between NSI and the US government. So the National Science Foundation stopped funding for the internet, and NSI got the right to charge $35 for a domain name per year. And certainly NSI realized quickly that this could become a huge business. So it means $35 for one domain name means if you have 1 million domain names, you have already 35 million. If you have 100, if you have 10 million domain names, you have already 350 million US dollars annual income. And so the interest of the NSI was, to keep the market, dynamic, but the resource more or less limited. So that means to have 150 new generic top-level domains would have probably undermined the business of NSI, which was the manager for all 3 generic top-level domains, .com, .net, and .org. And in particular, .com was, produced this boom. And so the NSI, used its contacts to the US Congress and the US government to lobby against this idea of Postel, and the US government went to Postel and said, okay, to introduce new 150 generic top-level domains is not part of your contract. So that means you have signed the contract, and this goes beyond your contract. And so Postel was very angry about this, and so he went into the IPU and said, okay, probably, say, US, they want to stop me, and but I want to do this, and I'm reaching out for new topics. And he created a so-called interim ad hoc committee in 1997, together with the ITU and WIPO, 2 intergovernmental organizations, INTA, the International Trademark Association, because trademarks became a big issue, because a lot of people registered domain names, or trademarks as domain names without having any right in this specific trademark, and then tried to sell this domain name to the trademark owner for a higher price. So the so-called cyber squatting became a big issue in the 1990s. And then he also brought to this group the Internet Architecture Board. Ghana has his own organization, and ISOC. So there were 3 technical organizations, 1 business organization, and 2 intergovernmental organizations, which created this committee and worked on a plan for a memorandum of understanding to introduce not 150 but 7 new generic top-level domains in 1998. So, and this project failed also because the US government was very critical against this, because part of this deal was that the root server should be moved out of the United States to Geneva, should be managed by the ITU, and the Interim Ad Hoc Committee, memorandum of understanding would be hosted by the ITU, an intergovernmental organization. And so the question was, okay, will this be a way that the government, will now enter and will take over control over parts of the internet? So there was a huge discussion when the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference in 1998 had its meeting in the United States in Minneapolis. So the ITU has every 4 years a Plenipotentiary Conference. And in parallel, as a reaction to these plans of Postel, the Clinton administration started a process and said, okay, this domain name system should not be managed anymore, by one single person based on this contract with the US government. We should privatize and internationalize this, and we should hand it over to the private sector for a private non-for-profit organization. And so you had two parallel tracks. One was in the ITU, and the other one was the so-called white paper discussion, because the ideas for a reformation of the ENS was published in a white paper by the US government. And this finally led to the establishment of ICANN. And in 1998, then the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference did not accept the MOU by the IAHC, and when Postel changed sides again and supported then the establishment of ICANN, which was established in October 1998. And unfortunately, John Postel died a little bit later. So this brings me to the very last slide, and then to the end of the lecture. And this is I go now directly to slide 12. This is in Geneva, because ICANN started its work in 1998, but a couple of years later, the United Nations started the World Summit on the Information Society, and a lot of the discussion in the World Information Society went around the management of the critical resources and the management of the internet. And there was a controversy about, who should oversight the critical internet resources. Should it be done by ICANN? Should it be done by a governmental organization? There was a conflict between China and the United States government. The United States government argued the system works quite well. ICANN is the better organization, and we should continue. Private sector leadership, China argued the private sector leadership was good for 1 million internet users, but there's 1 billion internet users. So we have now involvement of government. So it was ITU versus ICANN. People could not agree on the definition, whether it's just the critical internet resources or whether it's all the other issues like freedom of expression, intellectual property, like cybercrime and all this. And because they could not agree, they established a working group, the Working Group on Internet Governance, which finally came to the conclusion there is no need for leadership in the internet. The best thing is to have a multi-stakeholder model where all governance are involved. And so the Working Group on Internet Governance, and this is the very last slide now, the slide number 13, proposed, the working group proposed a definition for internet governance, which says that the internet governance is the development and application by governments, private sector, civil society, in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. So this definition, by surprise, was finally supported by the heads of states in the Tunis summit, the second summit on the information society, and it's now the recognized definition for internet governance. And it has three important elements. The first sentence says governments, private sector, and civil society in their respective roles. It means all stakeholders have to be involved. There is no leader, so all stakeholders have to be involved. The second important element is here of shared principles, norms, rules, and decision-making procedures and programs. So sharing is the basic philosophy. So, and even decision-making has to be shared. So that means there is no one single decision maker. That means if you have a decision-making capacity, you have to consult with others, you have to bring input, in the bottom-up policy development processes, the sharing is a key element. And finally, it makes a differentiation between the evolution and the use of the Internet. The evolution means the more or less technical structure of the Internet or the critical Internet resources. This is the evolution. Use of the Internet are the issues which are more on the application layer, which relates to other complicated issues, as I have mentioned already in my intellectual property, freedom of expression, cybercrime, and all the security issues we have now in the present discussion. So let me end here for the moment. So that means this was an overview about nearly 50 years now of history of the Internet. And I'm looking forward to see all of you in Meissen. So I take this now as the basis of your knowledge. So that means I will not repeat this when I give my first lecture on Monday morning in Meissen. And I wish all you well in the preparation for the Meissen School and have a safe trip. And we'll all see us in Meissen in 10 days from now. Thank you very much.